India and the United States are nearing a long-stalled trade agreement that would reduce U.S. tariffs on Indian imports. Reports indicate that tariffs could be down from 50% to reportedly about 15%. Celebrating the Diwali festival at the White House, President Trump said a trade deal is nearing with India after his call with Prime Minister Modi.
A great conversation. We talk about trade, we talk about a lot of things, but mostly the world of trade. He's very interested in that.
President Trump once again said that Prime Minister Modi had assured him that India would wind down its Russian oil purchases, raising the prospect of a reprieve. In a post on X, Prime Minister Modi acknowledged the call but did not share the contents of the discussion.
I spoke to the Prime Minister Modi today, as I mentioned before, and we just have a very good relationship. And he's not going to buy much oil from Russia. He wants to see that war end as much as I do. He wants to see the war end with Russia, Ukraine. And as you know, they're not going to be buying too much oil. So they've cut it way back, and they're continuing to cut it way back.
However, there was a slight change in President Trump's latest remarks compared to previous statements. Last week, the U.S. president said that he had assurances from Modi that India would stop buying oil from Russia. On Tuesday, Trump said India will not buy that much oil from Russia. So does Trump want India to stop buying Russian oil or just reduce its energy imports? Previously, the U.S. president had also noted that once the war ends, India could go back to buying Russian oil. Those inconsistencies in Trump's statements raise several important questions. Number one, what's his real motive? Is it to end the Ukraine war, or is it a geopolitical move by driving a wedge in India-Russia relations? And is his demand for India to curb Russia energy purchases short-term or long-term? On the other hand, India has stood its ground and said that the country's choice will be determined with its consumers as the priority. This brings another question to the fore. Will a trade deal hinge on satisfying Trump's pressure on India to curb Russian oil imports? Still, both sides have said the trade talks are ongoing and moving along at a solid pace. The latest details on the negotiations show India's willingness to import more non-genetically modified American soy and corn. Previously, India had concerns about importing genetically modified GM corn and soybeans due to fears of them entering the food chain. While the negotiations are ongoing, potential proposals, including allowing GM corn for ethanol production and non-direct food consumption. Even GM soya is being considered for India's rapidly expanding poultry and livestock sectors. American GM soybeans are being looked at as an alternative cooking oil option to expensive sunflower imports. The U.S. is seeking new markets for its agricultural products after trade disputes with China. India has also proposed to buy more U.S. oil for a trade deal. Hopes are for a pact at the APEC summit next week, or at least a mini deal. All right, joining me live from Washington, D.C. is Gaurav Sansanwal. He is a fellow chair on India and emerging Asia economics at CSIS and also a lawyer. Thank you so much for joining us on WION this morning. Given President Trump's shifting remarks saying that India should buy no oil from Russia to now saying that India will not buy that much oil, do you think Washington's real leverage in these trade talks is economic or geopolitical?
Hi, Susan. Thanks for having me. No, I think we know that President Trump is a tough negotiator, and this comes at a time when not only is he trying to negotiate the U.S.-India trade agreement, but also trying to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. So it's one of those situations where we would call it geoeconomics because it's an amalgamation of geopolitics and economics at this stage. But I think one thing is very clear that this is in the context of a negotiation, and to that extent, it's a negotiating tactic. And India's firm but quiet diplomacy seems to be working in that. President Trump has a better sense of what India's red lines are. And in that context, it seems that some kind of a reduction in India's imports of Russian oil is possible because India has done that historically. It obviously increased its share of Russian imports, making it up to around 35% right now. But before the war, it was much less, and the share for US was much higher. So it's possible for India to go a bit higher on the US side, maybe by 5 to 10%, and decrease that contemporaneously on the Russian side. So I think for India, it would be that could be a win-win scenario where India just goes back to status quo before how things were before the war, and for President Trump, it's a way to gain more leverage over Putin. So I think it's a situation where he kills two birds with one stone.
Very interesting. And there are reports that the United States will increase its 50% tariffs on Indian imports to about 15%. What are the likelihoods of that?
Well, Susan, I think, it doesn't matter what models you use on Excel sheets. The end result will be that India is going to be the third largest economy in, a short period of time from today. And US cannot afford to sit on the sidelines. India is executing trade agreements left, right, and center. The trade agreement that it most notably did with the UK is already getting UK firms preferred market access into India. India is already negotiating a bigger one with the EU. EFTA's done, Australia's done. It's negotiating agreements with the Middle East. All this to say, India is choosing its trade partners, and for the US, it cannot afford to sit on the sidelines as India gives preferred trade access to all these other Western powers and Middle Eastern powers. So it is in the US interest too to not to take this forward, and so I do think there is now momentum for it to happen in the next couple of months because of the reason that I think President Trump has tested the limits of his negotiation ability here by the looks of it, and so we should be close to now getting something on the paper.
All right, very interesting. Of course, we'll be watching very closely what happens at that APEC summit as well. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us on WION.
Of course. Thanks, Susan.